Hi, folks. Thanks for joining us. We'll be starting in just a couple minutes to allow everybody to flow into the session. All right. Thank you to everyone who's joining us. We're ready to get started, so I'm going to go ahead and stop screen share and hand it over to Kristen to get us started.
Welcome, everyone. I hope you're enjoying your day. Our next session will focus on a few of the foundational aspects of the SDGs. If you attended the breakout sessions earlier today, you'll probably hear some similar themes coming through. And this is really to talk about how the SDGs intersect. Our speakers today are from the nonprofit and for-profit sectors and academia. Tony Pipa from Brookings will be the moderator today. And Tony worked with Zia on the 17 rooms model that you heard about earlier today to advance the efforts of the SDGs. So I'll turn it over to Tony. Tony?
Thanks, Kristen. And it's really wonderful to be here today for this session on the foundational aspects of the SDGs and to be part of the 2020 Goalmakers National Forum. So thanks. I want to thank you, Global Washington, and for the invitation. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And we have leaders from 3 different sectors here, from business, civil society, and university, to talk about the elements that really cut across the Sustainable Development Goals. They highlight how the Sustainable Development Goals reflect the interdependencies of sustainable development, and they force us to think about how the human and economic and environmental dimensions of the SDGs have to happen all at once, and how we leverage those elements and the goals themselves to maximize the contributions that each of these sectors that we'll hear about can help contribute to progress on sustainable development. Some of these cross-cutting issues include things like equity, which we are all grappling with the focus on right now, human rights, adapting to the climate, to the changing climate, and using a gender-focused approach, just to name a few. And it's these kinds of things that make the SDGs different from their predecessors, the Millennium Development Goals. We often think of the SDGs as this interdependent framework rather than just 17 distinct goals that are isolated from each other, and have to think about the leverage points that can enable progress on multiple dimensions all at once. At the same time, similar to the Millennium Development Goals, the SDGs provide us with a set of targets and metrics that enable governments, international organizations, businesses, universities, philanthropy, civil society, and researchers all to get on the same page as to how we really measure and understand progress. So I'm joined here today by 3 fabulous leaders and conversationalists, and I'm really looking to forward to this conversation. First is Ali Mokdad, who's the Chief Strategy Officer in Population Health at the University of Washington. Betsy Andersen, who's the Executive Director at the World Justice Project, and Monica Gorman, who's Vice President in Responsible Leadership and Global Compliance at New Balance. And I'm not going to go into each of their bios because I really want to save the time for the substance of our conversation. suffice it to say that really looking forward to drawing upon their expertise and experience and their dedication and commitment to the SDGs as we talk about these particular issues. So I invite each of them to join me and to get the conversation underway. And Betsy, I'm gonna put out a question for each of you, and I'm gonna ask Betsy to go first. But 2020 has been quite a year, and many of us who follow the SDGs, many experts, many policymakers, feel as though the COVID-19 pandemic has really, in some respects, strengthened the case for the SDGs. Those interdependencies I just talked about really have been exposed by and surfaced by our experience. This is a health crisis. It's also an economic crisis. It's a crisis that's really showed vulnerabilities amongst those that we call those who are being left behind. We think of the SDGs as having this theme of getting to the most vulnerable first. And so those interdependencies among different dimensions of development have really come to the fore in this particular year. And we've seen questions of equity and resilience and those sorts of things. So just to get us started, how do you think the SDGs provide us a roadmap for what comes next, 2021 and beyond? And if so, if it provides some roadmap, how does it help us think about what comes next? Betsy, let me turn to you first.
Great. Thanks so much, Tony. And it's great to be here with these colleagues and be a part of this conversation. So I come at this question from the justice sector and from civil society. And I think you're absolutely right that the pandemic has certainly driven home the importance of the SDG agenda and the interrelationship among the different goals. I'd like to maybe step back and reflect briefly on those relationships from the perspective of the justice sector and share some research that the World Justice Project has done to try to map access to justice and what we've learned about the interrelationship between justice and other development outcomes, because I think that informs very much the path forward. So a couple of years ago, very much in the context of the SDGs, SDG 16 promises access to justice for all. So we were quite interested in understanding what that meant, to getting a baseline assessment of where we are in terms of access to justice, and to understand how people experience justice, particularly with respect to civil justice. There's lots of data on criminal justice globally, but there was not much globally comparable data on people's civil justice problems. So we set about to survey households in 101 countries about their everyday justice problems. So things like housing problems, debt issues, consumer issues, family disputes, employment problems, access to social services that have a legal dimension. And we surveyed folks globally and found some important things about this issue of interrelationship among the SDGs. First of all, we found that justice problems are ubiquitous. 49% of people in both rich and poor countries globally reported that they had had a justice problem in the last 2 years. So this is obviously a big set of issues that need to be addressed on the scale of the SDGs. Second, and this is sobering for those of us in the justice sector, we found that justice systems are failing people. The vast majority of people, some 85% in many countries, do not turn to the formal justice system or to lawyers or other outside advisors to solve their justice problems. The third finding, and this is the one that goes most clearly to the interdependency of the SDGs, the third finding was that these were not just legal problems that people had, but that they had profound consequences in their lives. So 43% of those we surveyed who had a legal problem reported that it had a negative consequence in their lives. 29% said it had a health consequence. 23% said that it caused them to either lose their job or their housing or have to relocate. So obviously from this data, we see this interconnectedness and this rippling across the SDGs of justice problems. And so that was before the pandemic. And as you said, Tony, the pandemic has really just driven this home and exacerbated these challenges and the cascading effects of justice problems. We now are preoccupied with this, not just in the justice sector, but across all sectors. And we see that our inability to address these foundational legal problems, justice problems, is affecting our ability to be resilient in the face of a challenge such as the pandemic. So it's justice problems, things like lack of secure and adequate housing, employment in the informal economy, discrimination in the labor sector or in housing, that is exacerbating the pandemic and leading to worse health outcomes and also economic outcomes. So certainly, as you say, the pandemic is underscoring these interdependencies, but the SDGs do provide us a really rich toolbox. First and foremost, a mandate to work on these issues, to work on them together, and to gather data, to understand them, and quite importantly, to map that data across sectors so that we can understand these relationships and better work to identify interventions that can get at the root causes. I've got some ideas about specific things we can do, but let me pause there and pick up those ideas later in the discussion.
Great, thanks. And we'll get to. So I love the particular lens driving in on where justice sits within the SDGs, but then how the SDGs, as we think about going forward out of the pandemic, force us to then take that and as you said, work together and think about the data that we need actually to be able to address the things that the pandemic is exposing. Ollie, let me turn to you. Ollie Mokdad, as I said, Chief Strategy Officer, Population Health at the University of Washington, and you've been working on these issues. What do you think in terms of what do the SDGs provide us? I mean, we're still in the throes of the pandemic. We see help on the horizon, but as we think of coming out of into 2021 and beyond, what do the SDGs provide us as a way to be thinking about what progress looks like coming out of the pandemic?
Thank you, Tony, for having me here. So when you look at what was happening prior to COVID-19, we had a lot of disparities and issues that we needed to address. And then come COVID-19 that showed us how important the SDGs are. The issues that we are facing right now are complex and they require a multi-approach to solving them. And unless you do it in this holistic approach, you'll not be able to address the issues, and very important for all of us to know that. Why SDGs are very important? Being a metric person, unless you measure something, you're not going to be able to change it. And the fact you put a metric and then you say, this is where I need to be by that here, and hold everybody accountable to it. And quite honestly, because every country is doing so, that race between countries and competition is good, because the eyes are on everybody. What are you doing about these issues that are attacking your community? And unless you address them, you're not going to prosper and live longer, healthier, and have economical development. So from the University of Washington, early on, we realized that all of these complex issues needs a comprehensive approach. And that's what we did with the Population Health Initiative. It's not only health, it's also the environment, social economic equity. It's everybody in the university, from engineering to law, to nursing, to social work. Everyone has a part to play here. And it's very important for us, being an educational institution and a well-known medical institution, of course, a health institution, is to make sure that our faculty, our students, we want still the best engineer to graduate from the University of Washington. But we want him and her to know what role they play in the bigger picture in order to make this world prosperous. The last thing I want to say, we are realizing right now that the best investment in our communities and our population and our working force, human capital, unless they are educated unless they are healthy, unless they have access to legal issues, unless they have the environment supporting them. As a country, we're not going to prosper, we're not going to maintain our development, and we will leave a lot of our people behind.
So that's very helpful. So any issue that we're dealing with is complex. And so as you say, we need a comprehensive approach. Metrics also bring us a way to sort of create that race to the top and know how well we're doing. Even puts us in, as you were saying, like countries in competition with each other in some way, just sort of measuring. And then also that people-centered approach. It's got to be an investment in the human capital in people about where progress starts. Monica, let me turn to you from a perspective of, the business world and the work that you're doing at New Balance and where you see sort of your role in the contributions that that business can actually make to this kind of agenda, and where do the SDGs help us in that as we look to what's happening with the implications we have of COVID and coming out of it?
Great. Well, thanks, Tony, and thank you so much for having me here today. I mean, as the other speakers have noted, COVID, really more than any other event in recent history, has just driven home how interconnected we all are and how fragile many of our systems are. And this has certainly been true for business as well. What started out first as a supply disruption when COVID hit Asia quickly morphed into a demand disruption as well, when nearly all retail stores were closed around the world. And many companies, New Balance included, we essentially had to throw out our playbook and come up very quickly with a different way of doing business. And so in that context, COVID has only magnified the importance and relevance of the SDGs for business. So for example, at New Balance, we knew that our associates' health and well-being had to come first if we had any hope of keeping our business going through the darkest days. We've had to make accommodations for our working parents. They are strained to the limit with schools closed, with hybrid learning, with all of the other burdens they're having to bear. Last spring, when we pivoted to convert our US manufacturing facilities to make personal protective equipment instead of shoes, we knew that was only possible if we implemented strict safety measures. And that was everything from redesigning the production floor to accommodate social distancing or putting up plastic barriers where that wasn't possible, to providing PPE for people and other such measures. We've had to really look at our global supply chain. We need to preserve that global supply chain. And to do that, we've actually had to strengthen our relationship with our suppliers. So that looks like providing assurances that we will receive and pay for the orders we've already placed. It looks like sharing information back and forth. What are they experiencing on the ground right now? It looks different in different countries. And also trading details back and forth on the best health and safety measures to undertake, because this is an evolving situation. And in that sense, I would actually stress, I think we learned as much from our colleagues in Asia as they learned from us, especially in those early days of the pandemic. So what does all this mean? Coming out of COVID, I suspect we're going to hear a lot more about the concept of stakeholder capitalism. And frankly speaking, for those of us who work in the nexus between business and sustainability, this isn't a new concept. Many of us have been engaging with stakeholders from civil society, from government, from the nonprofit sector for a long time. At New Balance, which is privately held, it's also essentially the vision of the Davis family. Our New Balance mission statement says we are building a brand that our athletes, our associates, and our communities are proud of. But when the Business Roundtable came out in support of this concept in August 2019, pre-COVID, it received a lot of fanfare. It was considered groundbreaking. Again, I suspect now that COVID has really driven home the fragility of the global supply chain, the fact that so much of the economy relies on essential workers, the fact that a virus knows no geographical or social boundaries. It is impossible to ignore the fact that business operates in and is dependent on a larger societal context. So to that end, I would say the SDGs provide a good roadmap for business to envision the post-COVID world. If we in the corporate sector want to see a future economy that provides sustained and inclusive growth, if we truly want to drive innovation and sustainable industrialization, then we have to pay attention to elements like health and nutrition and education and equality, because these underpin the drivers of economic growth. And how we do that is going to look different for different companies and industries. It's different in different places, and there are real barriers, both structural and geographical, and we have to tackle those. But I would close by saying the SDGs now more than ever offer up a vision for how we would build that better future, and they invite all stakeholders, including business, to reimagine their efforts towards that goal.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. I mean, so it's interesting to me how your initial comments really built on what Ali was just saying. I mean, that was a very people-centered approach when you started actually just with your people and what the health and well-being of your people, and having to be comprehensive in how you were even redesigning the pivots you were making as a business to PPE and taking into account lots of different dimensions. And then even to the macro, as you were saying, around stakeholder capitalism. I mean, the environment in which business operates is a larger societal environment, and making sure that that's functioning and stable is really important for the innovation and the growth on your hand. But on the other hand, you can contribute to that as well by being intentional and being focused, and the SDGs sort of provide that common language or platform to do that. So let's dig in a little bit more to these foundational aspects, things that do cut across the SDGs. And Ali, I'll turn to you. Now, your background is in global health, and we're talking about, a pandemic, which is about health. But you're Chief Strategy Officer of a new population health center. You already talked a little bit about how you're thinking more comprehensively, just beyond health, to the interventions that you're talking about. But is global health sort of fundamental to all the SDGs? How are you approaching these complex issues, such as the pandemic, through the Population Health Clinic Center? Tell us a little bit more. You touched on it very briefly, but tell us a little bit more about that comprehensive approach that you're taking.
Very good. So global health is very important. We don't live by ourselves in the world, and COVID-19 showed us that we are so interconnected. A problem somewhere else, 10 hours could be here in Seattle or anywhere else in the world. So that's very important. A problem, environmental problem, as we dealing with our environment, a suffering or a disaster in one place will impact all of us here. And as a planet, we are as healthy as the weakest member of us. Why global health is very important? Because there are lessons to be shared. So we need to remember that here in the United States, we can learn from other countries lots of good lessons, and vice versa. So local to global is very important. And right now with SDGs, because different communities will be impacted differently by anything we do or not do during COVID-19 or after COVID-19. That lesson sharing is very important. So we have Hispanic community here. So some country has figured out a solution. We could apply it here. Now, coming back to the comprehensive approach, we know, for example, and I'll give you a specific example. We know, for example, that education is a strong determinant of health and development. So a woman who's more educated anywhere in the world is more likely to understand the sign of danger for her and her family member, more likely to seek medical care, more likely to adhere to that message. So here is a simple thing. How could we advance as a humanity if there are many women who cannot read and write, and we expect them to play their role in? And that's why I'm concerned when it comes to COVID-19, especially where I come from in the Middle East, that because of COVID-19, we delayed education. And I'm concerned some girls who didn't go to school last year and this year will never go back to school again. So this is an example how all of these things are interconnected, how we need all of them to come together. It's like Monica described in a business model, in a supply chain of a business model. If one of them is impacted, the whole thing is impacted. And that's what we are doing here at the University of Washington. We said we have a lot to offer here, and we can bring all the resources at the university, but we needed to remember that we cannot do it alone. We have to partner with the right people. That's one. Two, we have to set realistic goals and go after them. Otherwise, we'll be talking like a mile long and 1 inch deep. So we need to, the university, what we are strong at, what are the problems that we are best equipped to deal with, and how we can bring our know-how and our collaboration to bring an innovative approach to make a difference in one of these places. And that's what I would expect everybody in the world to do, is what you're good at, what your partners can provide you, and then go and do it at the community. Roll your sleeves, show that you can do it at the community, share the lessons, even failures, more important than success. So nobody repeat your mistake if you made a mistake. And don't be shy. Our president at the university asked us to be bold and innovative and think outside of the box, and then take some risks, because right now we cannot wait anymore. We need to move as fast as we can, learn as we go, change the course if we have to, but make sure we're involving the community in everything we do.
So it's really interesting, that point you made about being only as strong as our weakest link. We can think about it in terms of like a chain, like a supply chain, as you said, that as Monica was speaking, but we can also think about it actually throughout the SDGs in some way as well. And how you were just talking about how important education is as a determinant for health, and how getting, missing that education right now is actually going to be working against us as we think about many other aspects of the agenda. Well, Betsy, let me turn back to you, because you had already started us down this road and this path when you were talking about the data that you were collecting around justice and access to justice, and the importance of that to different parts of the SDGs. And goal 16 was actually, that is one of the big changes, I think, from, I mentioned the Millennium Development Goals in the beginning. That is also one of the big changes from the SDGs to the prior set of goals as well, is to bring in justice and peace and strength of governance as well. So share with us some insights and the applicability, I think, to the SDGs and the foundational aspects around justice and around those particular issues.
Sure. Well, you're going to hear me pick up some threads of Vali's remarks, and in particular, the importance of education and the kind of information ecosystem in which justice takes hold. And this is one of the things that has emerged from our research that's most surprising. Yes, we see these interconnectedness between justice and other outcomes. But one of the most striking things that we have discovered, and really it's a wake-up call for the justice sector, is what we've learned when we've asked people about how they solve their justice problems. And we asked them to really describe what we characterize as their justice journey. We wanted to understand how they understand their problems, to whom do they turn to solve them, whether they're able to solve them, what are the obstacles that they encounter in solving justice problems, in order to really figure out how to make the system work better. And what was surprising, and I have to say this is somewhat hard for judges and lawyers to admit and to hear, what was surprising was that we learned that it's not about us, actually, that the main problem is not that there are not enough judges and lawyers. We don't necessarily need more judges and lawyers. The problem is not necessarily that the system is too slow or too expensive. This is often what we assume. Those are problems, but they're not the biggest problem. The biggest problem is that people don't understand their legal problems as legal, as opposed to just bad luck or a community issue or a family issue. They don't understand that they have rights. They don't know that there are laws and institutions that are designed to serve them. They don't know how to access those institutions, and they don't trust them. And this has really profound implications for the justice system and also for this entire agenda. And it's a game changer for us. And it means that we cannot just throw more judges and lawyers at the problem, that in fact, we need to work in collaboration with other sectors to work across our silos, if you will, to meet people where they live, to engage them through the institutions that they do trust, to invest in collaboration with medical professionals, with educators, with the private sector, with businesses, with social services and administrative agencies, in order to undertake preventive interventions that will secure rights and equip people with the information about their rights and an understanding about the ways in which they can vindicate or enforce them. Just one quick example of low-hanging fruit of a fundamentally a justice or legal problem that judges and lawyers have only really a bit part to play in solving. And that is the challenge that's encapsulated in SDG 16.9, which is, it calls for legal identity for all. And there are 1 billion people globally who lack legal identity. In many countries, more than 50% of women lack legal identity. And this has a ripple effect in their ability to access education, employment in the formal sector, housing, healthcare, education, and the like. The solutions are available in a digital world. We have the ability to deliver digital identity. Judges and lawyers do play a role, particularly in family disputes or in adjudicating migration matters. But again, it's a bit part. Really, this is something that we need to work with medical professionals who are there at those critical life moments at birth and death. We need to work with other institutions, with administrative agencies to implement a solution. So that's an example of the importance of collaboration, which is really a key takeaway for us in tackling some of these legal problems, is to do so in partnership with others.
Well, it's how foundational is that finding that people don't see the problem that you were talking about as a legal problem. And I mean, that really actually reinforces just the very importance of Goal 16 and also other places within the agenda that legal issues like legal identity are actually have a foothold in the agenda. Wow, that's a significant insight too. And we'll come back to this, I hope, but interesting that it comes out of the data that you're collecting around the justice journey. I love that that formulation, the justice journey. So Monica, your company New Balance has really made a commitment to gender equality and climate action. We've actually even talked a little bit right here around the implications for gender on education and other things. But explain to us how these issues relate to the values of the company and why these particular issues in relation to the SDGs, and how you see the importance of these issues to contribution and advancement of the SDGs.
Sure. So in my earlier comment, I mentioned that we at New Balance see ourselves as part of our community, and it's a vision that comes from our ownership. And then, of course, as a global business, our community is, so to speak, worldwide. But we know that community, whether it's our own associates, it's our consumers, it's our suppliers, it's civil society, that they care about how we do business, and that's as important as what we do. So historically, we still make shoes ourselves in our own US and British factories, and we also work with a global supply chain. So we've spent a lot of time on SDG number 8, which focuses on decent work and sustainable economic growth. But the longer we've been at this, the more we've realized how interdependent the SDGs are, something that COVID has really only magnified. So we've learned to make progress. We've learned that in order to make progress against decent work, we also have to focus on some other goals. And in particular, that's true for gender equality and for climate action. So I'd say gender equality is important first and foremost because the majority of the people who work in our global supply chain are women. And we simply can't achieve decent work and inclusive growth unless we tackle the specific barriers that have historically held women back in our industry. So frankly speaking, women are typically underrepresented at the higher levels throughout the entire apparel and footwear value chain. And that's whether it's in a factory, a trade union, or a corporate office. And obviously COVID is only exacerbating these inequalities because we know women are bearing a disproportionate burden around childcare and job losses and so forth. So to that end, I mean, certainly pre-COVID and most definitely post-COVID, we are focused on empowerment programs to help women build their careers. And this is true not just in our corporate offices, but throughout the supply chain. We've set a goal to reach all women working in our strategic suppliers by 2025. I should say these programs look different in different locations. They need to be localized, but they do share a common vision and goal. Also, interestingly, just picking up on some of the themes that Betsy outlined, I mean, these programs include courses on access to health, access to education, knowing your legal rights, because again, women can't be empowered in the workplace if some of those fundamental aspects of their lives, they don't have tools to deal with those fundamental aspects of their lives. So those are the types of things that can be included in these empowerment programs, in addition to communication and decision-making and problem solving that's important in the workplace. And I should note, we're doing this not just because it's the right thing to do, it is, but it's also good business, because an engaged and empowered workforce is absolutely crucial to succeeding in the post-COVID 21st century marketplace. If I turn to climate action, this is a key focus for us because climate change is literally going to make or break our future. For New Balance to be successful, for people to want to buy our running shoes or our baseball cleats or our active wear, they need clean, open, safe places to run and to work out and to play. And we have to be able to make that product. We need reliable sources of raw materials, including water. We need consistent, stable manufacturing locations, and we need a reliable transportation infrastructure. Climate change threatens literally all of this. I should say, in addition, the scientists and the epidemiologists keep reminding us climate change is going to increase the risk and likelihood for more pandemics. And we clearly know from COVID, what that does to business. The big challenge here is that the old way, the traditional way, the usual way of doing business is part of the problem. And so we literally have to rethink everything from how we power our operations to how we design, how we make, how we service our products. And that is daunting. Even so, we have to do it. So we've set ambitious goals, and it's to drive progress, and it's also to hold ourselves accountable. We've committed to powering 100% of our owned operations with renewable energy by 2025. We think it's really important to have goals that we can measure ourselves against. We've signed on to the UN Fashion Charter's commitment to reduce absolute greenhouse gas emissions by 30% by 2030. And we're working towards this by looking at everything from how we design our products to the materials we use, to what happens to them at end of life, to how we invest in cleaner energy throughout the supply chain. We don't fully know exactly how we're going to get there yet, but not doing so is not an option. So there's a long way to go, but it's actually really exciting, and we're pretty excited about it.
Well, thanks for that. And I love how the focus down into the gender equity goals and the climate action goals come from that focus on the decent work, right? That's a great example of how the framework itself challenges you to sort of look at the interdependencies. And I also appreciate your candidness on saying we don't know exactly yet how we're going to do that, but it's a commitment that we have to make, and the common language and the common framework of the SDGs sort of pushes our thinking on that, and is going to help enable us in that thinking about what that might look like. We're coming up on, we just have a few minutes left. So this is going to be a little bit of a lightning round, but I'd like to leave our audience with some words of advice. Each of you have been working within your organizations on the complexity of the SDGs. So what would you say, what would be the word of advice that you would give to people attending this forum that they should keep in mind as we look at, this really wide-ranging 17 goals, 169 targets? What advice would you give them related to the foundational aspects? And Monica, we haven't given you a chance to go first yet, so I'm going to turn first to you. We're going to have to keep it short, just a minute or two, so just one or two highlights.
Sure. So I'd begin by saying it's not uncommon for some in the business community to question how the SDGs relate to us still. And that's particularly when it comes to certain goals, it's more obvious how they might relate to policymakers or academic institutions. So that's where I would say, not just to business, but to any organization, look at your sphere of influence. We all have areas where we have a direct ability to influence and drive change. We also have areas where our influence may be more indirect, but indirect is not negligible. And no one organization is going to tackle all 17 goals. That's just not possible. But what we can do is focus on where we can make that meaningful, measurable difference in our direct and indirect spheres of influence. In corporate parlance, one way to describe this is your material issues. And so I talked about how we've identified decent work and climate action and gender equality. We actually have 6 goals that we're looking at as our material issues. But again, I've also talked about how that doesn't mean we don't ever pay attention to other goals, and issues like hunger and education become part of that day-to-day work. So really think about your influence, pick those goals you want to drive that emphasis on, but be aware of the others. I mean, if we see an issue of nutritional issues causing a specific problem in a factory, we will tackle that head on. We're not going to be addressing nutrition directly, but where it comes up as we're trying to drive towards other goals, we tackle that as well. I would say the same about the rule of law. We're never going to drive the rule of law, but we cannot operate without good rule of law. And so we will join peers and civil society to raise concerns with host country governments if we see that being an issue. So again, just to sum up, look at your sphere of influence. You can't tackle everything, but everybody can do something.
Great, thank you. And Betsy, Monica just mentioned rule of law. We only have a couple of minutes remaining, but what would your word of advice be?
Well, really 3 things that I hope came through in my remarks. One is the power of data. Second, to really understand the problem and identify solutions. Second is the importance of collaboration and understanding that data, not just in one's own silo or sector, but looking at data and relationships across sectors so that we can devise collaborative interventions. And third, I want to pick up on an idea that Ali introduced earlier, which was look maybe in surprising places for models and lessons learned. This is a global agenda, and there are global insights to be gained in maybe surprising places. We are at the WJP running a competition right now, the World Justice Challenge, we're really trying to crowdsource solutions for effective responses to the rule of law issues that the pandemic has posed. And so I'd invite people to check that out on our website and get involved in sharing ideas with us and with our community, because we've got lots to learn from one another.
Great. Data, collaboration, look in surprising places. Ali, I'm going to let you have the last word.
No, thanks, Tony. Data, I would say measure it. You need a metric to measure what the 17, each one of them at the local level, because the national will mask disparities. You need to see where progress is happening through these metrics and change your message if it's not working for certain population. You need to measure it. Unless you are able to measure it and see where you are. IHME provides on our web all the SDG health related all the way to 2030 by locality for certain countries.
Great, and I love that. So data, but not just data at the national global level where the indicators are coming to us from the SDGs, but at the local level or within your sphere of influence, as Monica was talking about. We've got to be able to measure. This has been an incredibly rich conversation. Thanks to all of you for the expertise and experience you've shared today. I think we've got into a lot of different places of the SDGs, and it's a wide-ranging agenda, as Ali mentioned, a complex agenda, but also helps us with comprehensive interventions to contribute towards. Thanks very much, and hope you have a good rest of the conference, that these give you a foundation on which to build on. Thank you.
Thanks to our speakers for sharing their expertise with us today. Coming up next is a panel on the global development post-election in the US. Click on Agenda in Whova and select the next session to be connected. Thanks everybody for attending.